Your Excellency, Member of Knesset and Deputy Foreign Minister Dani Ayalon, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ron Prosor, Member Knesset Rabbi Nissim Ze'ev, Ambassador Ronald Lauder, Mr. Richard Stone, Mr. Malcolm Hoenlein, Honorable Urin Kotler, Professor Alan Dershowitz, distinguished guests, and dear friends. It is a pleasure and privilege for me to address this illustrious gathering on justice for Jewish refugees from Arab countries. As co-president of JJAC and a refugee, son of refugees, this issue is very close to my heart. To finally see that this issue is being discussed in this building at the United Nations and in the media worldwide brings a sense of relief and recognition not only to me, but also to the millions of Jewish refugees and their descendants, that the wheels of justice are beginning to turn. First and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity to thank my dear friend, Deputy Foreign Minister Dani Ayalon, for his steadfast support and leadership on this issue. From the moment we brought this matter to his attention a few years ago, he immediately took it upon himself to bring it to the level of high importance in the Israeli government and in the international arena. It is his dedication that made this conference a reality. I also want to thank the World Jewish Congress for stepping in and making the issue of justice for Jews from Arab countries a major point in their worldwide agenda. Their defense of Jewish causes during all of the decades of their existence is essential and irreplaceable. I would be remiss if I did not mention and thank the early efforts of Malcolm Hoenlein at the Conference of Presidents. As original founders of the organization I lead, JJAC, Justice for Jews from Arab Countries. I am pleased to see you again supporting these efforts. I would also be remiss if I did not mention the efforts and hard work of Member Knesset Rabbi Nissim Ze'ev, who as a pioneer fought against all odd and strong opposition from his own coalition government to bring the issue of justice for Jews from Arab countries to the floor of the Knesset and pass a law to recognize the predicament and compel the government of Israel to seek justice for Jews from Arab countries. I would like to recognize and thank my colleagues, member of JJAC, for all the years of dedication, hard work, and hope against all odds. And I would like to mention the presence of my co-president, Mr. Sylvain Abitbol, bringing the attention of the world to the issue of justice from Jews from Arab countries. My friends, we are finally here. Ladies and gentlemen, a major obstacle to the elusive peace in the Middle East is the issue of the Arab-Palestinian refugees. Yet a key component to the understanding of this problem has been overlooked, ignored, and obscured in the current dialogue. This component is the history of the human rights violations, persecution, and ethnic cleansing of the Jews from Arab countries. Jews constituted a stable and historic community in these countries dating back at least 3,000 years, centuries and millennia before Arab nationalism and Islam. The Aleppo Syrian community dates back to King David 3,000 years ago. The Yemenite community to King Solomon 2,900 years ago. The Iraqi and Iranian community date back to the first Babylonian exile 2,500 years ago. And the Egyptian community over 3,000 years, counting from the time of Moses. When the United Nations voted in 1947 to partition the Palestinian mandate, the mandate of Palestine, into a Jewish state and an Arab state, anti-Jewish violence exploded, reaching crisis proportions. Jews in Arab lands became the target of the frustrated Arab mobs. Official discrimination, persecution, and expulsion took place, leading the Jewish communities to flee for their lives, in many places with only the clothes that they were wearing and leaving everything behind. My personal and parent story begins in Aleppo, Syria. Excuse me. Jews have been living in Aleppo for thousands of years, as I said. The Jewish community in Syria formed a central link in the unbroken chain of Jewish settlements throughout the Fertile Crescent, which stretched from ancient Israel to Babylonia. The Syrian Arab nationalist movement brought the Arab-Israeli conflict to the attention of the public in Syria. Soon after the United Nations resolution in 1947, anti-Jewish riots broke out in Aleppo. Synagogues were set afire, Jewish shops and houses were pillaged, and thousands of Aleppo Jews were forced to flee the country. Less than 4,000 Jews remained in Aleppo in the 1950s from the original 18,000 in the 1940s. It is believed that during the synagogue burning on December 1st, 1947, the Arab rioters entered the great synagogue, broke open the safe thinking it had money, but they found the Aleppo Codex, the most ancient authoritative copy of the Bible, and damaged it. Under the persistent repressions of the authorities from 47 to 1990s, many members of the Jewish community sustained the risk in order to escape the persecution. Many attempts at escaping ended in tragedies, with innocent Jews being tortured and also murdered. Today, Syria has less than 50 Jews living in the country. A Jewish community that originated over 3,000 years ago is no more. My own parents fled for their lives once the mobs, aided by the police they had once trusted to protect them, began burning synagogues and Sifrei Torot in what became known as the Haraye, the burnings. Syrian rioters entered the building in which my parents lived, which was right next to the synagogue. In minutes, my mother, and I want to take a moment to welcome my mother, who's here in the hall. We'll ask her to stand. She can tell you the story in the original Arab language. It is for her and for many, many, many like her who deserve that justice that we are all here today. My mother heard those screams when she was at home. They were beating Jews, she heard, destroying their property, looting stores, ruining businesses, and in this way altering the course of Sephardic Jewish community of Aleppo forever. Escape was risky, as the gates were shut down and Syrian police patrolled the border, keeping Jews as prisoners. Those that dared to try and bribe a well-connected official or walk outside the border where no one would see them were mostly unsuccessful. Instead, they were being killed, tortured, or arrested in the process. My own parents hid in my grandparents' house, further away from the synagogue. Then, a few days later, they made separate attempts to escape. My mother obtained a doctor's permit and took my older brothers to the Lebanese mountains. The air was cleaner and a promise of a healthier life awaited them. Since one of my brothers was ill for over 1 year, my father's escape took a different path. He tried to smuggle himself out of the country and was caught several times. He never gave up the quest to join his family. However, and his last attempt found God on his side. Just when he thought he was unsuccessful yet again and was caught in the streets of Aleppo, he immediately realized he was actually caught by a Syrian guard he happened to know, who surreptitiously warned him of his impending arrest. He told him, "Look, you are being pursued by the authorities because you have tried to escape a few times, and I have heard of orders to arrest you. In fact, I am coming back to arrest you tomorrow." My father did not need any stronger hints. With the help of some friends, he boarded the train to Lebanon that same night and enlisted the help of a train official with whom he was acquainted. The man hid him in the cargo load and told him he could not breathe, sneeze, or move a muscle, or else they would be both caught and killed. My father hid that way for hours, his fears intensifying once the train reached the border. Police searched the cargo load very well, and when they got to his wagon, he was certain he would be discovered. But luckily, the officer who was searching got distracted and moved on to another wagon. He was saved miraculously, I would say, but knew he could not remain idle. As soon as they reached the border, my father jumped off of the moving train and onto a ravine. Amazingly, aside from a few bruises, he was unscathed and began to walk through the rough Lebanon terrain in search for his family. He traveled by night so as not to be seen and eventually reunited with his wife, my mother, and children, my siblings. They all received the shock of their lives since they had no idea he was coming. He left everything behind: home, furniture, business, clothing, and property. All he had left in the world was a small bag and the clothes on his back. It was the creativity of my mother and the courage of my father that ultimately brought them to relative safety. Had my father been caught, I would not have been standing here today to tell you the story. I would not have been born. Though Lebanon was relatively peaceful, our status always remained as refugees, even though most of my siblings, including myself, were born in Lebanon. We could never leave the country because no other country wanted to receive us. We were refugees. We could not move out of the country within the country without refugee identity cards. Yes, we were allowed to live in the country, but not as free citizens. During the next 22 years in Lebanon, living as Jewish refugees, we lived through the 1956 Sinai campaign, the 58 Lebanese Civil War, and the 1967 Six-Day War. We endured discrimination, fear of persecution, and hid our identity most of the time. After Black September and the transferring of the PLO leadership to Lebanon in 1969, the Jewish community felt threatened and began to flee Lebanon. One day, a poster-sized picture was plastered on many mosques all over Lebanon. The picture was of 3 rabbinical leaders, which included my father, all dressed in their rabbinic robes with their talit. The caption under the picture said, "These are the Zionist Jewish leaders who are helping Jews escape to Israel." Needless to say, my father and the other 2 rabbis became an immediate target. For weeks, they hid in their homes until they were assured by the government that they would be secure. Immediately, my father and another rabbi planned for the exit out of Lebanon. A special request by my father's cousin, who already lived in Mexico after escaping Syria earlier, was made to the government of Mexico to accept us as immigrants. Fortunately, it was approved after what seemed like an eternity waiting for the news to arrive. I remember very well the document that we had. We had a laissez-passer. And on that laissez-passer, there was a stamp when we left the airport of Lebanon saying, "Aller sans retour." Finally, like many other Sephardic Jewish families, we left Lebanon. We were able to immigrate to Mexico in 1971, leaving behind a life and history after thousands of years in that once beautiful and ancient region of the world that the Sephardim once called home. Thank you very much.